You can't handle me, just go." The words were a broken whisper, swallowed by the vast, empty prairie. Isabella sank to her knees, the tall grass hiding her from a world that had always stared. Her frame, nearly 7 feet of power and bone, shook with sobs she refused to let loose. For 26 years, she'd heard the names: unnatural, overwhelming, a giant, too much woman for any man. Hope was a fool's game, and she'd stopped playing long ago. Love was a fairy tale. Her reality was debt, her father's debt, to be paid with her hand in marriage to a man she'd never met. But then, out of the morning mist, a rider appeared. He wasn't what she expected. Not some grizzled enforcer sent to drag her to the altar. He was young, his face etched with a desperate sort of determination. He dismounted with a grace that didn't fit the rugged land, and his eyes were gentle. It was Samuel. Her broken heart dared to beat again. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Samuel had ridden for 3 straight days, not sleeping, not stopping, ever since he'd heard the news. Isabella, forced into a marriage. The same Isabella who had secretly taught him to read in the quiet moments of her visits to his family's farm. He'd loved her then, not for her staggering height, but for her quiet intelligence. He loved the careful way she made herself smaller, folding into herself so others wouldn't feel intimidated. He loved the secret, fleeting smile that touched her lips when she thought no one was watching. Seeing her now, clutching a bundle of healing herbs like a shield against the world, broke something inside him. He knelt in the grass beside her. "I don't want to handle you," he said, his voice trembling with a sincerity she hadn't heard in a lifetime. "I want to love you, exactly as you are. Magnificent, powerful, perfect." His eyes held no pity, only a raw, stunning adoration that felt more dangerous than any threat. Isabella's throat burned. She wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to fall into the arms of the one person who had ever looked at her with reverence instead of fear. But life had taught her that kindness was a trap. Hope was a trick that left scars deeper than any fist. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the world shattered. The sound of hoofbeats, fast, angry. She flinched, her head snapping toward the horizon. Dust curled into the air like smoke signals, dark against the rising sun. 4 riders, her father's men. Her breath hitched. "They're coming," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Samuel, you don't understand. They'll kill you. They'll drag me back." Samuel rose to his full height. He was lean, dwarfed by her side, but his spine was iron. His hand brushed against hers, not pulling, not forcing, just an offer. "Then we don't give them the chance," he said. Isabella stared at him, a war raging in her chest, terror versus a longing so fierce it hurt to breathe. For a single agonizing heartbeat, she hesitated. This was madness. This was a death sentence. But then she looked at his hand, still waiting for hers. With a trembling breath, she placed her palm against his. His grip tightened instantly, warm and sure and real. It was the first choice she had ever truly made. The riders closed in, their shouts ripping through the wind, cruel and certain. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs like a war drum. Samuel pulled her toward his horse, every stride a desperate prayer against the closing distance. Her body shook. She was strong enough to fight them all, to break bones and snap chains. But the thought of watching Samuel die for her, it froze her to the core. His voice cut through the fog of her fear. "Trust me. Just once, Isabella. Trust me." They reached the horse. He swung into the saddle in one fluid motion, then held out his hand. For the first time in her life, she didn't shrink. She didn't try to hide. She took his hand, and a surge of forgotten strength flooded her veins. He pulled her up behind him. The horse grunted under their combined weight, but Samuel held it steady, his body a firm, unyielding shield in front of hers. Hold on, he commanded. The world exploded into motion. The horse lunged forward, pounding across the prairie, a desperate flight from the cage that was her life. Bullets cracked the air around them, whistling past like angry hornets. Isabella gasped, burying her face in Samuel's back, her arms locked around his waist. The wind tore at her hair. Her eyes burned with tears of terror, but something else was mixing with it now. Something fierce, something alive. One of the riders spurred his horse hard, drawing close. He was a brute of a man from her father's ranch, his face twisted in a sneer. In his hand, he swung a heavy iron chain, meant to snag her, to drag her down like an animal. Samuel yanked the reins hard, veering their mount sharply to the left. The chain whipped through the air where Isabella had been just a second before. It missed by inches, the snapping sound echoing like a broken bone. But in that moment, Isabella's fear didn't just vanish. It ignited. It turned into pure, unadulterated rage. Before the man could recover, before he could swing the chain again, she reached out. Her long arm shot out, her fingers closing around the cold iron links mid-swing. The rider's eyes went wide with shock. She yanked, hard. With a strangled scream, the man was torn from his saddle. He slammed into the hard-packed earth, a cloud of dust marking his fall. Samuel glanced back, his own eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. "Remind me," he muttered, a grim smile touching his lips, "never to doubt your strength." He spurred the horse even faster, but the others didn't give up. They pressed on, relentless, their rifles now aimed with deadly intent. Samuel leaned low, guiding the horse not across the open plain, but toward a jagged scar in the earth, a narrow ravine. "Hold tight," he shouted over the wind and the gunfire. The ground dropped away. The horse, sure-footed and brave, leaped down into the twisting, rocky path. Hooves struck stone, sending sparks into the shadows. The riders cursed from above, trying to follow, but the trail was too treacherous, too narrow for their pace. Rocks tumbled down the canyon walls, echoing like distant thunder. Samuel's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. Isabella held him tighter, the adrenaline coursing through her. At last, the sounds of pursuit faded, swallowed by the labyrinth of stone. They didn't stop until the horse, trembling with exhaustion, stumbled into a hidden clearing where a thin stream trickled over mossy rocks. Samuel slid from the saddle, his chest heaving. He turned to help her down. She was shaking, her eyes wild, tear tracks still visible on her dusty face. As her feet touched the ground, her legs buckled. Samuel caught her, his arms steady and strong around her. "You're safe," he whispered. The words broke the dam inside her. A sob tore from her throat, raw and broken and full of years of pain. "I'm not safe, Samuel," she cried, her voice cracking. "I'll never be safe. They'll never stop coming for me." He cupped her face, his calloused thumb gently brushing away a tear. His gaze was unwavering. "Then let them come. We'll face them together. No more running, no more hiding." Her lips trembled. "You'd give up your life for me." His eyes held hers, a silent vow passing between them. "I already have." The silence in the ravine stretched, heavy and profound. It was filled with all the words she'd never dared to believe, all the hope she'd never dared to feel. And for the first time in her life, Isabella felt something stronger than fear. She felt chosen. A faint echo of distant hooves reminded them the fight was far from over. But in that moment, holding each other in the shadow of the canyon, a new story had begun. One written not with debts and chains, but with defiance, with love. And when Isabella finally spoke, her voice no longer broke. It was steady. It was steel. "Then I'll fight too." Samuel smiled, weary but unbroken. "That's all I ever wanted." But as he held her, his eyes drifted to a strange marking carved into the canyon wall. An old symbol, a circle with a lightning bolt through it. He'd seen it before, in a dusty old book his father used to own. He didn't know what it meant, not yet. But a cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. This ravine wasn't just a random hiding place. They had been led here, and the fight they were in was older and deeper than either of them could possibly imagine. The quiet of the ravine was a lie. Samuel could feel it in his bones. This wasn't safety. It was the calm eye of a hurricane. He kept a steadying hand on Isabella's arm as she caught her breath, her back pressed against the cold stone of the canyon wall. Even trembling, even afraid, she looked like she was carved from the mountain itself, a pillar of strength wrapped in a lifetime of pain. The distant echo of hooves had faded, but the silence they left behind was even more menacing. "They'll be back," she said, her voice a low murmur. "My father won't stop, and Joseph." She shivered at the name, a bitter poison on her tongue. "Joseph will hunt us to the ends of the earth." Joseph Quinn, the man who had bought her, the man whose name carried the weight of power and cruelty across the entire territory. Samuel crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then we make our stand. Here, now." Her eyes widened. "Fight them?" "Samuel, there were 4. There will be more." "I'd fight the whole damn territory for you," he said, and the calmness in his voice was more convincing than any shout. Underneath it was a burning fury he'd carried for years, a rage that had smoldered every time he saw her shrink herself, every time he heard the whispers that followed her. He was done with it. Done watching her hide. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of dust and horses. Samuel's grip on his knife tightened. He knew what that meant. "They've split up," he muttered, scanning the canyon mouth. "Trying to box us in." That was the moment the change happened. Isabella straightened up, slowly, to her full, magnificent height. Her shadow fell long and dark against the canyon wall. The fear was still there, etched around her eyes, but it was being burned away by something new, something hot. "Then we don't run," she declared. A grim smile touched Samuel's lips. "That's the woman I knew was in there." The hoofbeats returned, louder this time, bouncing and echoing off the stone walls until it sounded like an army was descending upon them. Samuel gripped the simple skinning knife at his belt. It wasn't much against rifles, but it would have to be enough. Isabella didn't look for a weapon. She became one. She bent down, her powerful hands closing around a jagged length of fallen rock, her knuckles turning white. The first rider appeared at the canyon's mouth. His silhouette was a dark, menacing shape against the fading sun. It was the man she'd pulled from his horse. His arm was in a makeshift sling, his face a mask of hate. "There she is," he shouted back to his partner. "Just like Joseph said, the giant hiding with her little farm boy." Isabella's jaw clenched so hard it ached. She stepped forward, the rock held ready. Her voice, when it came, was sharp enough to cut stone. "If Joseph wants me, let him come and get me himself." The rider sneered. "Oh, he will, after we've softened you up for him." Before the ugly words could even settle in the air, Samuel charged. He moved like a phantom, his boots pounding the dusty ground, the blade in his hand a flash of silver. The rider fumbled for his revolver, his overconfidence costing him precious seconds. Samuel slammed into him, not with brute force, but with speed and leverage, yanking the man clean out of the saddle. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and curses. At the same instant, the second rider burst into the clearing. Isabella didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She acted. She lunged, not at the man, but at his rifle. The heavy rock in her hand smashed down on the weapon's barrel with a sickening crunch of metal and wood. The rifle clattered away, useless. The man roared in frustration and swung a heavy fist at her. She caught his wrist. For a single heartbeat, they were locked in a struggle of wills, man against the unnatural woman. His muscles strained, his face purple with effort. Then, Isabella's true strength surged. She twisted. A sharp crack echoed through the ravine, followed by a high-pitched scream of agony. The man dropped to his knees, clutching his broken arm, his face pale with shock and pain. Samuel rolled on the ground, the first rider pinned beneath him, the point of his knife pressed firmly against the man's throat. "Go back," Samuel growled, his voice a low threat. "Tell your master she is not a piece of property to be claimed." The rider spat blood, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and a new dawning terror. "You think you can keep her? She belongs to Joseph Quinn. She's—" Samuel pressed the blade harder, a thin line of red appearing on the man's skin. "Say it again," he hissed, "and I'll end you right here." The man's breath hitched. For the first time, Samuel saw what he wanted to see: raw, undiluted fear. "Run!" Samuel commanded, pulling the knife away. The rider scrambled to his feet, clutching his bleeding neck, and bolted for his horse without a second glance. The other man was still on the ground, groaning, cradling his shattered arm. Isabella towered over him, her chest heaving, her eyes burning with a fire he had never seen before. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. Samuel rose, his knife still slick in his hand. Silence descended, thick with the smell of blood, dust, and rage. Isabella finally dropped the rock. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the aftershock of what she'd done. She looked at Samuel, her eyes shining with unshed tears, her voice barely a whisper. I've never fought back before." He wiped his blade on his sleeve, his gaze locked on hers. "Then you've been waiting your whole life for today." A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sorrow. It was a tear of release. Samuel stepped closer, his voice soft but certain. "You're not too much, Isabella. You are exactly enough, for me, for this fight, for whatever comes next." But before she could answer, a new sound drifted across the prairie. It was faint at first, then clearer. A long, low, chilling blast from a horn. It wasn't a signal for a hunt. It was a declaration of war. Samuel's stomach sank. He knew, without having to be told. Joseph's coming himself. Isabella's hands curled back into fists. The fear was still there, a cold snake in her gut, but something new was burning hotter, a defiance she had never allowed herself to feel, a strength she was only just beginning to understand. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The prairie fell unnervingly quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Samuel stood at the mouth of the canyon, his knife a cold weight in his hand, the dust of their small, brutal battle clinging to his clothes. Behind him, Isabella stood with her back to the rock wall. Her chest rose and fell in steady, controlled breaths. The hunted look in her eyes was gone, replaced by the hard gleam of a freshly forged weapon. Then the horn sounded again, long, low, and steady. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a promise of a reckoning. Isabella's hand twitched, just barely brushing the sleeve of Samuel's shirt. That's him. Samuel didn't have to ask who. He knew the name. Joseph Quinn. A man whose name was spoken in whispers. A name that was both a curse and a crown. The ground began to tremble. Riders appeared on the horizon. Not two, not four. A full band of them, at least 6 men, rifles held ready across their saddles. And at their center, a figure on a massive, coal-black stallion. He was cloaked in black wool, a specter of wealth and power against the dying sun. Even from a distance, Samuel could see the glint of polished silver on the man's belt. Not just any pistol, but a custom Colt gleaming like a mirror. Joseph Quinn reined in his horse on the ridge above them. The fading light cut across his face, revealing features that were handsome, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. Cruel. His eyes, cold as a winter river, found Isabella instantly, locking onto her like an arrow finding its mark. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite a sneer. "There you are," he called down, his voice rolling across the stones, smooth and deep and laced with menace. My runaway bride. Isabella's knees threatened to buckle, a lifetime of intimidation washing over her, but she forced herself to stand tall to meet his gaze. Samuel moved, a subtle shift, placing himself partially in front of her. A useless gesture, he knew. Joseph's eyes burned right through him. "You will return with me now, Isabella," Joseph continued, his tone patient, as if speaking to a difficult child. "And I will be merciful enough to forgive this childish rebellion." He flicked his gaze to Samuel, his expression dripping with disdain. "As for the boy, I will decide what to do with him later." Samuel's jaw tightened. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. He simply raised his knife, the blade catching the last rays of sun, and said, his voice as calm and steady as the earth beneath his boots, "She's not yours." The men flanking Joseph let out a few harsh, mocking laughs. Joseph silenced them with a single, lazy flick of his hand. "Not mine?" His smile widened, but it didn't touch his cold eyes. "Everything in this county is mine, boy. The land, the cattle, the law, even her father's debts he paid with her." He leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes narrowing to slits. "What are you but a farm boy with a borrowed knife? Do you truly think you can stand against me?" Samuel felt Isabella shift behind him. Her voice, though trembling, rang out with surprising clarity. "He already has." For the first time, Joseph's cold composure cracked. His smile vanished. His gaze sliced to her, sharp as broken glass. "You will regret that, Isabella. I gave you the promise of comfort, of wealth, a name. And this is how you repay me?" She stepped out from behind Samuel, her full height and presence commanding the space. Her shadow stretched long and defiant in the dying light. Her voice cracked with emotion, but she did not look away. "You gave me chains." The words hit with the force of a physical blow. Joseph's jaw flexed, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He had no response, so he gave the only order he knew. He turned to his men. "Take them." The world erupted again. The riders descended into the ravine, a thunder of hooves and the glint of steel. Samuel grabbed Isabella's wrist, pulling her back, toward a thick fallen log that offered the only cover. Bullets sparked and screamed off the stone around them, splintering wood from the log. Dust and grit filled the air. "Stay low!" Samuel shouted. But Isabella didn't stay low. She grabbed the log itself. It was thick, heavy, something that would take 2 men to lift. With a guttural grunt, born of pure, desperate fury, she heaved it forward. The massive log rolled, crashing into the legs of the lead horses. The animals screamed and reared in panic, throwing 2 of the riders off balance. Samuel seized the opportunity. He lunged from behind the cover, his knife sinking deep into the thigh of the nearest man. The rider howled and toppled from his saddle, hitting the ground hard. More gunfire roared. Stone chips stung Samuel's face. He grabbed Isabella, pulling her deeper into the winding canyon, weaving between the jagged rocks. His chest burned, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Behind them, Joseph's voice bellowed like a storm. "You can't run from me! You can't fight me! She is mine!" Isabella stopped dead. Samuel turned, his eyes wide with panic. "Isabella, move! We have to go!" But she just shook her head, her eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to burn away all her fear, all her doubt. "No, Samuel," she said, her voice unshakable. "Not this time." She stepped out from behind the rock, tall, unflinching. Her voice soared over the chaos, a cry of pure defiance that echoed off the cliffs. "I am not yours!" The canyon fell deathly still. Even the riders hesitated, stunned by the raw power in her voice. For a moment, a heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the echo of her words. Joseph's handsome face contorted into a mask of pure rage. He raised his silver pistol, the barrel aimed squarely at her heart. "Then you will die for it." Time slowed to a crawl. Samuel saw the trigger finger tighten. He saw the hammer begin to fall. He saw the flash of ignition begin to spark. His body moved before his mind could think. He dove, shoving Isabella hard to the side. A white-hot, searing pain tore across his shoulder as the bullet meant for her ripped through his flesh. He didn't stop. He hit the ground, rolled, and with every last ounce of strength he had left, he hurled his knife. The blade spun through the air, a silver blur glinting once in the twilight before it sank deep into the flank of Joseph's prized black stallion. The animal screamed, a sound of pure terror and pain, and reared violently. Joseph was thrown, crashing into the dirt as his pistol flew from his grasp. His men scrambled, shouting in confusion, their perfect formation utterly broken. Samuel staggered to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, the world swimming in a haze of pain. Isabella rushed to him, catching him before he could fall. Joseph pushed himself up slowly, his fine clothes streaked with dust, his face a thundercloud of fury. His eyes found Samuel, then Isabella. His voice was a hoarse, venomous rasp. "This isn't over!" He let out a sharp whistle. The remaining riders closed around him, helping him onto another horse. Within moments, they were retreating, their dark silhouettes swallowed by the darkening horizon. The silence they left behind was deafening. Samuel sagged against Isabella, his blood soaking her dress. Her arms were wrapped around him, strong yet trembling. "You can't leave me," she whispered fiercely, her voice thick with tears. "Not now." He forced a pained smile, didn't plan on it. Her tears fell, hot against his face, but as he looked up at her, Samuel saw something new in her eyes. The fear was gone, the shame was gone. In their place was a resolve as hard and unyielding as the mountains around them. They weren't running anymore. They were standing. And when Joseph Quinn returned, he would find that the broken woman and the simple farm boy he thought he owned were gone. In their place was something far more dangerous. They were free. The walls of the abandoned line cabin groaned under the weight of the wind. Outside, a storm raged, but inside, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, blood, and something that felt dangerously like hope. Samuel sat on the edge of a rickety cot, his shirt torn open, his skin slick with sweat. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his shoulder, more muscle than bone, thankfully, but it burned with a relentless fire. Isabella's hands trembled as she worked. She'd stitched torn hides, patched wagon wheels, mended fences. She'd never stitched human flesh. Her powerful hands, usually a source of shame, now felt clumsy and too large for the delicate work of pulling a needle through his skin. But her face was a mask of grim determination. "Hold still," she commanded, though her own voice wavered. Samuel gritted his teeth, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the cot. Every pull of the needle sent a fresh bolt of lightning through his chest. He didn't look at the wound. He looked at her. He watched her jaw clench. He watched the fierce concentration in her eyes. He saw the tears she refused to let fall. "You've got the hands for this," he muttered through the pain. She shot him a sharp, angry glance. "Don't you dare mock me now, Samuel." "I'm not," he said, his voice raw but sincere. "Those hands, they were made to save things." The words struck her, cracking something deep inside. She froze, the needle hovering in mid-air. For her entire life, her size, her strength, had been a curse. Something to be mocked by men and whispered about by women. Her own father had sold it like a piece of livestock. And here was this man, bleeding and broken because of her, telling her she was built to save. Her throat tightened. With a shaky breath, she finished the last stitch, tied it off, and sat back on a small stool. She pressed her fists against her knees to keep them from shaking. "You could have died." The accusation was soft, fragile. Samuel leaned his head back against the rough-hewn cabin wall, closing his eyes against a wave of dizziness. I'd do it again. The fire popped and hissed in the hearth. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the storm and their own ragged breathing. Finally, Isabella whispered, I don't understand you. Every man I have ever known has wanted to own me, or use me, or break me. Why would you? She swallowed hard, the question catching in her throat. Why would you risk your life? He opened his eyes, and his gaze was so clear, so direct, it felt like it was seeing straight into her soul. Because you're not too much, Isabella. You're everything. The simple words hit her harder than any blow Joseph Quinn had ever dealt. She had to look away, turning her face toward the fire as hot tears finally slid down her cheeks. For the first time, she didn't try to hide them. She didn't wipe them away. She just let them fall. Samuel reached out his good hand, his fingers brushing against hers. His palm was small compared to hers, rough with the calluses of a farmer, but it was warm and steady. She let him hold it. The days that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm of survival. Samuel healed slowly, his shoulder bound tightly, his movements stiff and limited. So Isabella took charge. She chopped wood with an axe that felt like a toy in her hands. She hauled water from a half-frozen creek. She set snares and hunted small game with a skill born of desperation. The cabin, once a stranger's forgotten shelter, began to feel like a fortress. Their fortress. At night, when the pain kept Samuel awake, she would hum low, forgotten lullabies from her childhood. Not for him, really, but for herself. Soft, broken songs about wide rivers and endless skies and freedom. He would listen, his eyes closed, letting the sound carry him through the waves of fire in his shoulder. Every morning, Isabella expected the fear to return, the creeping, familiar dread that Joseph Quinn would appear at the door. But with each sunrise that they were still free, something new and solid began to settle in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but strength. One evening, as the fire burned low, Samuel asked a question out of the blue. What do you dream about? She frowned, stirring the meager stew in the pot. I don't dream. You must, he insisted gently. Dream of what life could be, if Joseph had never existed, if the world hadn't spent your whole life telling you what you were worth. She stared into the flames, her face unreadable in the flickering light. I stopped dreaming a long time ago, Samuel. It's safer that way. He leaned forward, wincing slightly, his voice earnest and steady. Then start again, with me. Her eyes flicked to his, searching. She looked for a hint of doubt, a flicker of pity, for any crack in his impossible resolve. She found none. Only the same quiet, stubborn fire that had carried him into a fight he couldn't possibly win. For her. I don't know how, she admitted, the words feeling like a surrender. Then we'll learn together, he said simply. The storm outside raged for 3 more days, burying them in a world of white. But inside the tiny cabin, something fragile and soft began to take root. They talked, in fragments at first, then in full stories, about the books she had secretly read, about the constellations he used to map from his father's porch, about the taste of wild berries in the summer. Small things, ordinary things, but each word was a stitch, pulling them closer together, mending hurts they didn't know how to name. Still, the shadow of Joseph Quinn never truly left. At night, Samuel would wake in a cold sweat, the sound of hoofbeats still echoing in his dreams. Isabella would find herself by the small, grimy window, staring out at the empty, snow-covered horizon, her jaw tight with a tension that never fully eased. They both knew it wasn't over. Men like Joseph Quinn didn't just let go. One morning, a week after the fight, a sharp, urgent knock came at the door. Isabella froze, the blood draining from her face. Samuel instinctively reached for his knife, pain lancing up his arm as he pushed himself to his feet. He opened the door a crack, his body blocking the view. A woman stood there, wrapped in a thick green shawl, her cheeks red from the biting cold. She carried a heavy satchel. Her eyes darted past Samuel to Isabella, and they widened with a flicker of recognition. "Isabella Quinn," the woman said, her voice clipped and businesslike. Isabella stiffened. "That name is dead." The woman's stern gaze softened slightly. "Good. Then let's keep it buried." She pushed her way inside, closing the door quickly behind her. "Name's Hattie. I've come to warn you." She dropped the satchel on the small table. It was filled with supplies: dried beans, salted meat, herbs, a flask of spirits. "Joseph is spreading the word in town. Says you ran off with a farmhand who bewitched you. He's putting a bounty on your head, Isabella, and a bigger one on yours," she said, nodding at Samuel. "He's hiring more men, gunslingers, trackers." Isabella's hands clenched at her sides. "How long do we have?" "Days, maybe less," Hattie replied grimly. She looked from Samuel's bandaged shoulder to Isabella's determined face. "I can't stay. If Joseph even suspects I've helped you, my life isn't worth a damn." Samuel nodded his gratitude. "Why are you helping us?" Hattie's eyes lingered on Isabella, a strange, sad light in them. "Let's just say Joseph Quinn took something from my family a long time ago. I'm just looking to balance the scales." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You've got more strength in you than you know, girl. Don't waste it running forever." Then she was gone, swallowed by the swirling snow. Silence filled the cabin again, heavier than before. Samuel opened the satchel, his jaw tight. "It's coming." Isabella's chest rose and fell, her mind racing. For years, she had lived in fear. In chains, visible and invisible. She had run. She had hidden. But now, something inside her refused to bow, refused to run another inch. She looked at Samuel, and her voice was as steady and cold as the winter landscape outside. "Then let him come." And for the first time in her life, she truly meant it. The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the world scoured and frozen. The sky was a bruised, angry purple, the snow crusted over in jagged, wind-blasted ridges. Isabella stood at the window, watching her breath fog the glass, her body as still and solid as an ancient stone. Behind her, Samuel moved, his motion still stiff. He tightened the strap of his knife sheath with his good hand. His wound was healing, a puckered, ugly scar, but his strength was still a shadow of what it had been. It didn't matter. The fire in his eyes burned as brightly as ever. They didn't need to speak. They both knew what was waiting for them out there in the cold. The first sound was faint, almost imagined. The rhythmic crunch of hooves on frozen snow. Then it grew louder, closer, until it was a steady, ominous drumbeat against the silent earth. The horizon seemed to split open, dark figures spilling through the gray light. Riders. At least a dozen this time. Rifles glinted in the pale morning. At their center rode Joseph Quinn, his face unreadable, his fine black coat trailing behind him like a shadow that could swallow the world. "They're here," Samuel said, his voice a soft rumble. Isabella straightened her shoulders. She no longer felt the need to make herself small. She no longer felt the familiar coil of shame in her stomach. She felt tall, towering, unbreakable. She turned to Samuel, her voice low but sure. "No more running." He gave a single sharp nod. "No more running." They stepped outside together. The frigid air slapped at their faces. Isabella's massive frame was silhouetted against the dark wood of the cabin door. She was a landmark. A mountain. The riders fanned out, dismounting, their boots crunching in the snow. They formed a half circle, a closing trap. Joseph stepped forward, his silver pistol gleaming in his hand, his hired guns flanking him like a pack of wolves. He stopped a few paces away, his breath pluming in the air. Isabella, he said, his voice carrying with an unnerving calm. It is time to come home. She looked past him, at the men with their hard faces and ready guns, then back to him. Her voice, when she answered, was not the whisper of a frightened girl. It was the roar of a storm. I am home! A muscle twitched in Joseph's jaw. You think this pathetic shack is a home? You think this broken farm boy is a husband? He sneered, the sound ugly in the clean, cold air. You were mine the moment your pathetic father signed the papers. You will always be mine. Samuel stepped out to stand beside her, his good hand resting lightly on her arm. He spoke with that same infuriating calm, each word a nail in Joseph's pride. She was never yours to begin with, Quinn, and she never will be. The hired guns shifted uneasily, their rifles rising, but Joseph held up a hand, silencing them. His burning eyes locked onto Samuel's. Are you truly willing to die for her? No, Samuel said simply. I'm willing to live for her. The words cut deeper than any blade. Joseph's carefully constructed mask of control finally shattered. His face twisted into a snarl of pure, unrestrained rage. He raised his pistol, aiming it squarely at Samuel's heart. In that frozen moment, time seemed to stop. The breath of the world held still. Isabella's eyes locked on Samuel's, then shifted to Joseph, and something that had been caged inside her for 26 years finally, violently, broke free. With a roar that echoed through the silent valley, she moved. She surged forward, covering the distance between them in 2 massive strides. Her hand, as strong as forged iron, clamped down on Joseph's arm before he could pull the trigger. The gun went off with a deafening crack, but the bullet went wild, splintering the cabin door instead of tearing through flesh. She twisted his wrist. The bones snapped with a sickening crunch. The silver pistol clattered uselessly into the snow. Joseph screamed, a sound of shock and agony, and struggled against her grip, but he was like a child fighting a bear. Years of silence, years of shame, years of being called too much. All of it poured into her now, a righteous, unstoppable flood of fury. She lifted him, his boots kicking uselessly in the air, and hurled him to the ground. He landed with a heavy thud, the snow cushioning his fall, but not his humiliation. His men froze, their guns half raised, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. They didn't know whether to shoot or to run. Isabella stood over him, towering, her shadow blotting out the pale morning light. I am not your property, she thundered, her voice shaking the very air. I am not your curse. I am not your wife. She took a deep, shuddering breath and screamed the last 2 words at the bruised sky. I am free! Joseph scrambled backward in the snow like a crab, his eyes wide with a terror he had never known. For the first time, he was the one who was afraid. You'll regret this, he hissed, his voice thin and reedy. But Isabella cut him off, her voice dropping to a low, sharp, steel-edged promise. No, you will regret underestimating me. The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Joseph's men looked at each other, their loyalty, bought with coin, wavering in the face of this impossible, terrifying woman. Some of them slowly lowered their rifles. Others began to back away. Not a single one moved to help their fallen master. Samuel stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. He bent down, picked up Joseph's fallen pistol, weighed it in his hand for a moment, and then tossed it contemptuously into a deep snowdrift. Leave, he said, his voice ringing with an authority that belied his injury. And don't ever come back. Joseph staggered to his feet, humiliated, beaten not by a bullet, but by the unbreakable will of the woman he had tried to chain. His glare lingered on Isabella, full of venom and hate, but he said nothing more. He turned, mounted his horse with trembling hands, and rode away. His men followed, their retreat a silent, shambling admission of defeat. Soon, they were nothing but dark specks on the distant white horizon. The snow began to fall again, soft, quiet flakes blanketing the battlefield, burying the tracks, cleansing the air. Isabella's chest rose and fell with deep, ragged breaths. Her hands, the hands that had broken a man's wrist and saved another's life, were trembling with the sheer force of her release. Samuel came to her, his good hand finding hers, his fingers lacing through her own. She looked down at him, her eyes brimming with tears, but this time they were not tears of shame or sorrow, they were tears of triumph. "You did it," Samuel whispered, his voice full of awe. Her lips curved into a smile that was fierce and beautiful and utterly her own. "No," she corrected him. "We did." He pulled her into an embrace, his head resting against her chest, her strong arms wrapping around him like the walls of a fortress. And for the first time in her 26 years, Isabella truly understood what it felt like to be wanted. Not for her size, not for her strength, not for her father's debts, but for herself. All of herself. Together they walked back into the small cabin, leaving the quiet snow to bury Joseph Quinn's shadow once and for all. From that day forward, the cabin on the ridge was more than just a shelter. It was a home. A kingdom built not of fear, but of a stubborn, wild, and unstoppable love. The fire burned low in the hearth that night, casting a warm, golden light on their faces. Samuel sat on the floor, carefully sharpening his knife. Isabella hummed softly as she stirred a pot of stew over the flames, the smell filling their small home. Outside, the world was silent and white and at peace. Inside, something far stronger than any storm had finally taken root. They knew the world would always whisper. They knew some men would always doubt and fear what they could not understand. But in each other, they had found something unshakable, something worth fighting for. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfection. It was freedom. Hard-won and fiercely protected. And that's where their story truly began. If this story gripped your heart the way it did mine, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new tale. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel, and your support helps us keep bringing powerful tales like this one to light. So, where are you watching from?